In this video, you're going to see two separate 20-minute drawings done from life by me, Lacey Swift, of my model, Liz. This first pose has a lot of foreshortening in it, but before I talk very much about what's happening with the pose, I want to mention the paper here. This paper is a gray paper that, until this point, I had never used before. This paper is the Hahnemuhle gray pad, and you're also going to see in the next drawing the Cappuccino pad. So these are some relatively new, at least I didn't know about them before, papers from Hahnemuhle, and you can find them both in a bound version and in a book version. If you want to see a little bit more information about this paper in depth, check out my review of the paper here, and I will go into more detail about the weight of the paper, how I like the colors, and I'll give a couple comparisons to some other colors from popular papers that you might be familiar with. But just to make a long story short, if you want the short version, I do really enjoy this paper. I've been on the lookout for a new paper for quite some time because all my favorite papers keep getting discontinued. My favorite papers have been the Daler Rowney Canford card and the Kona Classic papers. I loved those. And also, Blick makes some construction paper and cardstock in Scotch Gray, but it seems like they're getting rid of those colors as well, especially in the larger sizes. So I am currently just testing out and playing around with all kinds of different colors of paper, and this is one of them that I have been pretty happy with. The difference here, the things that I'm not quite sure about, are that this paper is really, really smooth. So it's really kind of delicate, and that makes me really careful with my marks. It's like it picks up the charcoal really quickly. So I feel like I just need to be careful. And it's also a lightweight paper at just 55 pounds. So it's a little delicate. I feel like I couldn't get away with a ton of erasing without ruining some of the surface of the paper. That said, the value is really nice. White shows up very well on this. And if you want to get dark darks, then this is going to help you because it picks up the material so much. I imagine that it'll be really helpful with colored pencils and those kinds of materials as well. Whereas here I'm using General's charcoal. And then in my next test, I'm going to be using the Marie's charcoal, which I also reviewed here on YouTube, and I'll leave a link in the description in case you're curious about those materials as well. Another thing is that these papers are only available up to an A4, which is about the size of an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper here in the United States, and I would love for these to be available in a slightly larger option, even if it wasn't like super big. Now, all that being said, definitely this paper was enjoyable to work with, especially if you want to get really delicate shading and hatch marks. But if you have a really heavy hand, you might find yourself overwhelming the texture here. Now here's the second 20-minute drawing, which is being done on the Cappuccino pad by Hahnemuhle. Here I'm also using the Marie's charcoal in order to see what the differences are between the two types of mediums on top of this new paper. But in terms of how I approached the drawing of these two pieces, I am doing a careful outline and I'm outlining the major shadow shapes. So I'm trying to go carefully and make sure that I don't shade in areas that I want to be the paper and I want to be clear. So you can see around the glutes, the underside of the arm, and all the areas of the back that are facing down, that I've outlined those areas that are going to be shaded, and all of those areas will have at least some charcoal in them. The other areas which are not getting blocked in with the shading right now, they will have a mixture of halftone, white, and the paper showing through. So here you can see that I am filling in those shadow shapes. And at first I'm being really careful because the paper is nice and smooth, and I'm making sure not to fill them in too dark. I will be adding darker areas in a little bit when I'm more sure of where I want them to be. So the first coating on here, I'm being very careful. Now that the block-in is complete, I am going in with some darker outlines in various places. And I'm trying to be mindful of not making all my outlines and all my shading the same. So some of the outlines are getting more attention and are getting darker, and other areas on the outlines are getting less attention and not quite as dark. At first, I'm looking for things like dark crevices, areas where there is a cast shadow happening or a core shadow, and I'm looking for more specific curves on the outside. Getting more specific and more variety in the curves adds interest and realism. Then I'm looking at shading halftones and trying to make sure that I don't let them get as dark as those shadow areas. So we want to keep a separation between what is shadow, which is where light is not directly hitting, and what is halftone, which is areas of shading on the light side of the form, just where there's less light hitting the form, but there's still some light. So it's really important as I go around not just to think about the fact that areas next to each other are lighter or darker, but I also need to think about why. Is it darker just because there's a reduction in light, or is it darker because the light is not directly hitting? The same thing with the light. Sometimes you might see a little bit of light, but you need to know, is that light coming directly from the light source, or is it bouncing off something nearby and creating a little reflected light? It's really important to note the difference because a reflected light should be darker since it's in the shadow side, and a direct light should, of course, be lighter. Now, I'll let you know in advance that when I finished this drawing, I decided that it could really be made a lot better. Of course, that is pretty much true from any drawing that I do from life, just because there is a limited time frame when I'm working on them. So if you would like to see how I took this drawing and then added to it in order to create more interest, check out the video in the link below. This is where I discuss how to use accents in the absence of a model to create a more interesting drawing. So just to let you know ahead of time, you don't actually need the model there to improve your drawing, and you don't need to make anything up either. Just check out the video and you'll see what I mean. If you would like full tutorials, I want you to go ahead and look at my Patreon page, which is patreon.com/School of Realist Art. That's where you're going to see real-time demos and videos where I discuss specific skills related to figure drawing. You're also going to find a lot of figure drawing references that you can use to study from home. But if you would like a full step-by-step course in figure drawing, check out figuredrawingacademy.com.